Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Freedom Forum, and I'd like to welcome my guests from Canada. Welcome, Robert Klinck.
Good to see you again, Arnie.
No
It's always
worries.
fun to be here.
Pleased to have you, Robert. And Wallace Klinck. Welcome, Wallace.
Hi there, Arnie. How are you doing?
I'm doing.
We have, and they're telling us in Alberta now that we've had the wettest summer since 1991 or 1999 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Although it's been a bit variable across the province, but
Mm-hmm. Mm.
and it's been relatively cool. So
Yeah.
again, the prognostications of the doomsayers is not proving to be too sound.
Yeah.
Well, how are the crops if you've had so much rain? Well,
I don't know. I'm not. I haven't been in
mm,
touch with the
that
agricultural
can be a
scene that
problem.
way.
Mm. Yeah. Now, the big ticket, of course, with rain is that you can get rust within the wheat,
That's right.
and it can degrade the grain. But
Yeah.
if they have a dry enough spell for long enough, then they seize the moment harvest and can get it in without
You
any
need rain at
adverse.
the right time in the spring, and you need the right time of the rain, and then you need to have a growing season, and then you have to have a nice dry fall.
Yeah,
It
that's
doesn't
right.
always work out that way.
Yeah, I read a book once, and I'll just use it as an entry to our subject, natural law. It was called One Straw Revolution, and it was about a Japanese farmer who grew his crops, and about a month prior to harvest, there were rains due, and a month prior to harvest, he would reseed. He would actually put the seed in the ground. He'd rub it into little mud balls, cover it with mud so that the birds didn't go after it, and then
Hmm.
he'd put it in the ground and essentially like distribute it. And then he would harvest the previous crop that was near maturity about a month later, and then he would cut the stalks down as food for the next round of growing. And so he was able to actually grow two crops, whether it was rice and barley or rice and wheat or something. He could grow two crops per season using that method,
Oh,
per year using that method. And he described himself as essentially chronically lazy, but he went after these things in a fashion just to actually harness the way things worked naturally. And
but he
that's
developed an increment of of association. He made the process more efficient by arranging things in a different manner.
That's right. He observed what was going on in nature and
Hmm.
he attempted to take advantage of his observations to bring about a system that would actually improve things. And I think that's fascinating because that to me demonstrates two things. One is the observation of natural law, and the other is a scientific method, the scientific approach. And that is you place a theory on the table, you test it, you evaluate it, and you continue to evaluate that theory. And if it doesn't hold water, then you've got to come up with a new one. So I think natural law, observing natural law, and the scientific method is a very sound approach to consider almost anything. And um, and that's why I placed the subject on the table today. What are your thoughts, Wally?
Well, I agree with you, Arnie, very much, because if, well, all you have to do is imagine if we were to suddenly say, well, natural law is all a big myth, let's ignore it, I think that we wouldn't last very long,
Yeah.
because over many, many centuries, we've learned something about the natural world, so more and more an accretion of knowledge that builds and builds, and maybe
Hmm.
can develop new tools and new ways of existing within the natural world more successfully.
Hmm.
So I think it's terribly important. The only thing is, we get into this problem, or this supposed problem, of trying to determine what is natural law and is it something different than divine law?
Hmm. That's an interesting question, Wally. And what are your thoughts on it, Robert?
Well, I was thinking of the Great Leap Forward in China, Mao Zedong,
Hmm.
and he had an inspiration and thought that if the farmers would just plant their seeds something like a foot deeper in the ground, they could get a bigger harvest.
Hmm.
And the result was that tens of millions of people starved to death. The farmers knew better. The
Hmm.
farmers had, thousands of years of practical experience behind
Hmm.
them.
Yeah.
They knew how to grow crops.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because certain things in the natural world will work. And if you ignore how things work, you're going to get a calamitous result.
Mm-hmm.
So this is uh, uh, the I guess the canon. C.H. Douglas, the founder of social credit, spoke of a canon, and
Mm-hmm.
he said there's a right way to do things. He was an
Mm-hmm.
engineer, and
Yeah.
he said when you get it right, you feel it's right, you see it's right.
Yeah.
And if you get it wrong, you get that that result too. But you have an accumulation of knowledge as a result of trying things out,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a tremendous heritage that we have.
Yeah.
You just think about navigation on the seas, and
Mm-hmm.
the first boat with some dugout log,
Mm-hmm.
and then they developed these fantastic sailing vessels, more and more impressive, with dozens and dozens of sails and complex relationships and
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of ropes, and
Mm-hmm.
learning how to set the sails so that you got the maximum efficiency out of the performance of the boat. And then,
Mm-hmm.
well, of course, with the development of internal combustion engines and so on, you got a different evolution. But if you look at the history of uh, uh, navigation on the seas, it's a constant accretion of knowledge and application of how to get a better sailing vessel.
Yeah. And
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 this is just respecting the natural law.
yeah. No, I find that's a fascinating example of natural law because what it is if you look at the images in your mind of, say, the Phoenicians, of the ancient Egyptians and their sailing, and how they were on a certain tangent, if you like, with their methods, and they had the Nile to navigate, and so it was certain types of waters and things like that. And yet, say, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the British, as sailors, they continue to develop their knowledge. And the thing is that it would have been small increments of knowledge, small increments. So when you come to, you mentioned the Great Leap Forward and a proposal, someone has a concept and they say, well, this is the way we're going to do it. When you have such a concentrated effort, concentrated and controlled effort on one trial, it can be absolutely catastrophic. Whereas if it was just one farm and you trialed it, and then, okay, that farm, it lost its produce for the year. So you wouldn't be affecting the whole country. But by the central planning concept, and the thing is, it doesn't stop. I'm not detracting from imagination. I'm not detracting from trial and error and things like that. But central planning itself can be, if it's wrong, absolutely catastrophic. And so to me, the idea of natural law is that you allow one individual to trial something and another individual to trial something else. And if someone wants to hold on and they say, I don't want to trial anything, I'm just happy with the way things are. And that way, the effect, of course, is minimal. But like yeast, it causes the whole dough to rise. And I've trialed millions of, well, I say millions, I've trialed so many things in my life. And sometimes I go down a dead end, but a lot of times I've found new ways of doing things, and it's been most fascinating. Certainly for me, it's exciting for me, but it's terrifying perhaps for people who are around me. Wally Klinck.
Well, the problem we have in social credit, we have this term that we use very much, the will to power.
Hmm.
And I think that it is best if you give due respect and due regard to people who have had experience within certain fields to, to carry on in those fields and to improve them beneficially,
Hmm.
provided that if they're selling those things, the consumer has the right to refuse them. We don't want experts to simply say, we're here now, we know what's best, and we're going to tell everybody what to do.
Hmm.
They should be serving the community, not commanding or dominating the community. It's a matter of respect for other people.
Yeah.
And that again comes down to a concept of what is the human being. Of course, the Marxist idea is that we're just organic substance,
Hmm.
matter in motion,
Hmm.
and that, for me at least, that does not satisfy very much. It leaves life in a rather barren position.
Yeah.
There's no continuity. There's no higher thought, really.
Hmm.
In other words, you live to work. You live to work, pay taxes, and die.
Mm.
So what are we? Just a bunch of ants, a bunch of.
Yeah.
There's got to be something. As Dennis Burns said, everyone has a special relationship with the canon,
Yeah.
with, and it is a sacrilege for any of us to try and interfere with that relationship, just as it would be in reverse if they tried to interfere with you in the same manner.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
And so that gives a very, very different and a much higher, you know, concept to life
Yeah.
than that we're just simply organisms doing what we do from birth till death.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's well, very well put, Wally. A thought that came to mind, and I know this is out in left field, is the beginning of life discussion. The beginning of life. When is it viable, etc., etc. And of course, it's a strong, if you like, the Marxist feminist who's pushing for abortion right up to the time of birth. And then I just realized, hang on a sec, you're actually advocating, let's put this in perspective. You're advocating that 50% of the the potential live births of children are women. They're actually females. And you're advocating the death of those for the convenience of another female. And I think, and hang on, that is so inconsistent. Inconsistent that, even if you're anti-male, I don't care that you're anti-male, you can be anti anything. But surely that that 50%, and then it brings up this whole thing about selective gender birth and all that sort of stuff. It's, to me, it's in defiance of natural law. Natural law is that we don't, no animal, no creature in the kingdom, no creature in the kingdom kills its own, especially in the womb. No creature, but we do. It's just we've got to rethink this whole thing. Robert Klinck.
Not only do they not kill their young, but it's quite amazing how mothers in particular care for their offspring, is it not?
Hmm.
You know, you see a little a colt born in a field, and immediately the mother is nuzzling it and
Hmm.
getting it to its feet, and then
Hmm.
it getting it to the place where it can get nourishment. And you
Hmm.
see this with certainly all kinds of mammals. I think you see it also in the aquatic world, and so there are people who think that humans and animals are completely different categories, and I would agree that they are different categories, but there are examples in nature of caring for others
Hmm.
that humans seem to have lost themselves.
Yeah.
They've departed from the kindness that is and the love that is actually displayed in nature.
Yeah, that's an
So that
interesting
is an
word,
interesting.
love. Yeah, love
Yeah,
is an
yeah.
interesting word because I think
Well,
that to
yes,
me is what's lacking for the unborn. Yeah,
yeah. The mother will often die in order to protect its young. If
yeah.
the lion attacks a baby giraffe, and the mother will sometimes deal with that lion
Mm,
in a
mm,
rather surprising way because you associate giraffes with relatively peaceful manners, but
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
when it comes to protecting its baby, boy, they'll
Yeah,
go
yeah. So,
do
so what we're
anything.
really
So,
what we're really doing is we're just, I guess, in a sense, we're observing the world around us, the actual how things work,
mhm.
and I think that that's very, very important because it's an observation. It's placing things into perspective or into context. We're putting it, this is how it actually works in the real world. And I think it's most important. If you choose to plant seeds 1 foot deeper, And in the natural world, you observe the result. The result is that this is obviously failure, complete failure. You've thought incorrectly. It's inconsistent with the canon, if you like. You mentioned the canon, Wally. And I think that it's most important that we as, if you like, human beings, as we as individuals, as human beings, we recognize that there is a natural law, a canon, and it's up to us to observe it and obey it. And if we attempt to defy it, we come up with a concept that is essentially in defiance against natural law. Well, of course, we reap the outcome of that, and it's our own doing. It's our own doing. So this brings me back, I guess, to the critical point for the show, and that is, as a civilization, we are going against natural law. We are centralizing power in the hands of a few and their tyrants. We're producing weapons of mass destruction. Don't tell me that the atomic bomb, the nuclear bombs, the bunker busters, these missiles, don't tell me they're not all weapons of mass destruction. They are. And we have this inordinate power to kill. And this, to me, is in defiance of natural law. We're harnessing things that we should have no right to. It's not to defend. These things are not about defense. They're actually for attack. They're for expansion and power. And of course, the individual who wants all this power is defying and placing themselves in a role, a godlike role, when they are only a human being. Wally Klinck.
And Arnie, they are exercising the power of their will
Mm,
over other people who are essentially defenseless
yeah.
because they, being organisms, they have what's called the survival instinct.
Hmm.
And it's absolutely essential that we have a survival instinct,
Hmm.
or nothing would survive
Yeah.
or persist.
Hmm.
But the thing of it is, that survival instinct is a primal thing, and we respond to that in a primal sense. So that because we know that it's critical to our survival, we can think about more sophisticated or less or more lofty or abstract things when our stomachs are full, but we can't do that when we're starving to death,
Yeah.
especially after we've died from starvation.
Hmm.
So the people that are exercising power in this manner are doing it in a way that is violating natural law, because
Yeah.
it is preventing the human individual from being a human being
Hmm.
in the full sense, in their full potential.
Yeah.
They are obsessed with survival.
Hmm.
And being obsessed with survival and not really commanding the major forces of production, they more or less have to seek their sustenance from those forces, and they have to back or to submit to these forces or these influences in order to assure their income.
Hmm.
They're not submitting because they say, yes, we agree with you. You have a wonderful idea. Your policy is marvelous.
Hmm.
They are very often submitting just because they say we have to live and there's no other way we can live unless we submit, because you have the power to dismiss us and starve us.
Yeah, that's right. That's a very profound observation, Wally. It's actually
And,
we don't actually look at what we would like to do. We don't get that opportunity. We look at what we have to do. And
and that has really interfered with
yeah.
the relationship between men and women, because men and women, instead of being mutually supportive and loving, they have become increasingly competitive.
Hmm.
And the competition has even gone between women. It's just competition.
Yeah.
In other words, it's an unnatural competition because it's based on the necessity to live in the face of abundance. If
Hmm.
we had actual scarcity, I guess we'd have to say, well, that's life. That's the way things are. Things are scarce, and we have to really work very hard and sacrifice and in order to survive. But that's not the case. And unfortunately, the more we actually solve the problem of production, the more our financial system becomes incapable of distributing that production. It seems totally counterintuitive, and it seems really quite insane.
Yeah.
but that's the way it is.
Yeah.
And so we have to manufacture more and more and more jobs, which are becoming scarcer and scarcer because of our very success in overcoming the difficulties of production.
That's
So
right.
that puts everybody in a more and more intense and competitive relationship, which is not it's not based on love.
Hmm.
It's based on, you see, I think that really our associations should be mutually beneficial.
Mm.
They shouldn't be trying to get ahead of the next guy or the next woman. They should be mutually. You want a functional society, one that where consumption can follow production in an easy and natural way,
Hmm.
in a way that is not a scramble as
Yeah.
it is today.
Yeah.
If you want to consume today, you have to scramble,
Yeah.
and you have to do things which you might not do otherwise if you weren't forced to because of necessity. And because we do these things and other people see us doing them and they have to compete, our society tends to become, would you say, jaded,
Yeah.
less sensitive to what which is good, to that which is kind and cooperative and mutually beneficial. It
Yeah.
becomes a struggle, a brutal struggle in a way, which we have in certain ways tried to tame,
Hmm.
but it's not working properly
Mm. Yeah. No, that's a
because yeah,
yeah. It's a very good observation, Wally. The actual productive system and natural law, if you like, or observation, observing what we're actually producing is vast amounts of everything. We have an abundance. We keep on saying it. We can produce anything. We have the technology, the farms, we've got the soil technology, the machinery, the industry, we've got the robotics. Um, what was the even the breeding, if you like, of different types of grains, that to optimize production and things like that. And fruit trees, things. I mean, you buy a fruit tree now, and they're just so heavily laden, and the roots, the root system, which is usually a graft, is so they've advanced it to suit certain soils and certain climates, and so you can have a mid dwarf or whatever or a standard tree. It's all the science continues to evolve, observing natural law. We can produce more and more and more with less and less inputs. The
and
issue is,
doesn't consumption naturally follow production in nature?
yes, yeah,
There's no interceding element
mm,
that interferes with that relationship of production
yeah,
going to consumption.
that's
We
right.
have a thing called money, and
Yeah,
money, you can't do anything with money.
yeah,
You can't produce without money, but again, there's no guarantee at the end of the process that you can consume unless you also have money. And the social credit demonstrates there is not enough purchasing power that is released by production in
mm-hmm,
our artificial
mm,
system way of doing things in
mm-hmm,
order to facilitate
yeah,
consumption.
yeah,
This causes it to become blocked. It's like a cost of a constipated economy,
yeah,
where you're producing like mad, and then you've got a blockage at the end of the pipe.
mm-hmm, that's exactly right. Yeah, Robert Klinck, your thoughts?
Yeah, there have been different cultures that had a concept of natural law. I think in China there was a concept called the Tao, which was the way, which
Mm-hmm,
was the right way for people to behave. And actually, China had some amazing periods of prosperity and development of technology and so on.
mm-hmm,
But I think that Christianity has an even stronger concept. If you look at the first verses in the Gospel of John, it begins, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then proceeds that the Word came to dwell among us,
mm-hmm,
and nothing was made that was not made through the Word. Now, the Word for Christians is identified with the incarnation of Jesus.
yeah,
And therefore, Wally was talking about how it would be desirable for people to relate to each other in a context of love, but you need some kind of an authority for that. And the authority Christians have is the example of Jesus' life. And he was the incarnation of truth, of the right way of doing things. Now, not necessarily in a technological world, but you can project from his example of healthy, sane human relations into that domain. But what did he say? He said, the world, your experience should be one of abundance.
Yeah.
He said that never, for example, did he exert any pressure on anybody. It was always a matter of them coming to choose the right way for themselves. And he would give them instruction on what the right way was, but he never said, well, you better do this, I'm going to whip you. Well, maybe the exception of the money changers. They're a special category, as we
That's right.
know.
He drove them out. Yes. Yeah.
But always he wanted people to do things out of a conviction that they were doing the right thing and that they were helping and loving their fellow men, you know. So
That's right.
he set that example. He also spoke of children as being in a special category, you know.
Yeah.
If you harm the hair of the head,
Yeah.
and surely that abortion issue
That's
should
right.
give us pause. It is absolutely terrifying that this is being tolerated in society, because the words out of Jesus' mouth say that there is going to be a terrible punishment for that.
Yeah.
He said, I didn't come to judge the world, and he didn't come to punish the world, but that is a special category of wrong behavior on the part of humans.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
It will
exactly
not
right.
be excused.
No worries. I'm just looking at the time. We're at the 27-minute mark, and I'd like to just see your closing comments, please, Wally.
Well, I think, Arnie, that we have our problems in this world are primarily because we have really deviated from natural law. We have turned our obviously our attention has been turned by people who exercise the will to power, who seek power, has been turned away from a yearning and a desire to reach out to whatever power it is in the universe has given us our lives and the meaning that goes with it. And I think that we have become materialistic to the point where we are neglecting, as Jesus said, he said, seek first the kingdom of God, and all these other things will be given to you.
Yeah.
Because you're going to do the right thing. You're going to relate properly. You're going to associate properly. Things will be done in a proper manner, and it will produce abundance.
Yeah. Yeah. No, beautifully put, Wally. That's exactly right. It's a lovely thing to think. We are surrounded by, if you like, the marvel of creation, and we can observe it. We can look at it. And what is sadly lacking is our choice, our free choice to adhere to it. Robert Klinck, closing comments, please.
Yeah, well, our concept of money, I think, is wrong, because money is a license to act in a money economy, and we don't recognize that it is essential that people should be provided with this license in order to, you know, follow their own star and use their potential in the best way they can. We all have different talents. It's a wonderful thing, but when we're sort of crushed by financial worries and insecurity, we don't realize our potential. And also, we don't have the concept of money being a sanction, because money gives us power over the productive system, and it would give us power over the political system if we had an assurance of getting it. But the only way we can get it is to surrender our independence to governments or to employers, and therefore we we lose the concept of it being a sanction that we apply, not in a cruel way, but just in a way of keeping the politicians and the productive system in line with what the population generally wants.
Yeah.
The problem with the disparity between producing and consuming powers is also a clear example of a violation of the natural law,
Yeah.
because it only makes sense that you don't produce something uselessly just to distribute money. You produce for the purpose of providing a product that can be consumed, can be used.
Yeah.
But because this concept of natural law and the right relations of things, it has become so weak in the population because it just isn't talked about, except now there's a fellow in the United States named Michael Jones who has made this issue of the logos sort of a topic of interest almost around the world. He's really had an amazing concept. I don't think, however, that he talks about logos in economics the way he should, because this issue of balancing production and consumption is so fundamental. It
Yeah.
should be practically the first
Yeah.
subject of economics.
I
But
agree.
it
Yeah.
is not, and
That's
it's
right.
not taught in universities. You know, you will not have that discussion because it would get people thinking in a way that might cause problems for the elite who want to retain power through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a very good summary, Robert. The thoughts that came to my head in there listening to you was, I wonder how many and I'll use America as an illustration because America is a military country. It's predominantly, I think, 50% of its economy is based around military equipment, military people, all that sort of stuff. And by being part of that huge military machine, your income is assured. But if your income was already assured, would you actually be part of that machine? And that to me is where the ethics comes into it, the natural law. Would you actually choose to pick up a gun, go to another country and start killing people if you had sufficient at home? And that's really where it comes down to it. This is what you're saying, Wally. This is what you're saying, Robert. I think it's really, really important. In Australia, there's no such thing as conscription. We've argued against it. I think they had it for a short time for the Vietnam War. Should never have happened, but it did. And Australia has always been one, if you wanted to participate, you did it off your own back. But when you get to a stage of destitution, where you don't have the spending power, and then of course you engage in this in order to what? In order to receive the spending power so that you and your family can survive. That's the question. This is the point about our defiance of natural law in this whole thing. This productive system. We would we would produce guns and bombs rather than food, rather than release credits for people to have the food, the necessities of life. We would produce guns and bombs and go and bomb and kill other people. That's a form of pathology, as far as I'm concerned. It's a sickness. And we haven't actually looked at natural law, and we are not attempting to place the economic system in, if you like, the discipline of natural law. Ethics, morals, it's all part of it. It's all part of it. It's such a very, very important question. We're at 34 minutes. A quick run around before I close this out. Wally.
Oh, you surprised me. I didn't
I
think you were
know.
going to call on me again. Well, I think, Arnie, I think I've said before, and I'm convinced that it is true, that it is the will to power that is really the problem.
Hmm.
And deception also when it comes to technical things too. But and it goes back to this Puritanism. It's a desire to dominate other people, to tell them what is good for them, what they should do, and they'd better do it.
Hmm.
And we live in an age of scarcity, they try to tell us, in the face of enormous abundance,
Hmm.
and threaten us with this alleged scarcity when it's only a scarcity of money that is causing the problem, not
That's right.
reality.
Yeah.
And so I think that it is, I think we really have primarily a psychological battle on our hands. We
Mm-hmm.
have to make it so that people can look at others and wish the well for them and wish them prosperity and
Mm-hmm.
happiness
Mm-hmm.
and get away from this destructive competitive thing. It's good to compete in order to do things right, but it
Mm.
shouldn't be to diminish the other fellow. It
Yeah.
should be to do things right, to know you're doing things right, and to have great joy and happiness and knowing that you have discovered a way of doing things correctly,
That's right. Prosper thy neighbor is a very
which
good.
is a way of honoring God, right?
Yeah, of course. Honoring humanity, honoring God. Yes, all part of it. That's right. Robert Klinck, one last chance at the mic.
Okay. Well, a lot of our institutions were evolved for the purpose of protecting individuals and giving individuals a say over what would be done in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
We have parliaments
Mm-hmm.
that are supposed to be giving people a say.
Mm-hmm.
They're not doing a very good job of it today, but that has been the result of, in large part, deliberate subversion. There's no question of that.
Mm-hmm.
We had the concept of trial by jury,
Mm-hmm.
which gave the citizenry control over even legislation, apparently, because the jury was empowered to overturn a law that was considered to be not working properly or unjust.
That's right.
So we
Mm.
had all these institutions, and it was based on the premise that the individual is precious, the individual should be protected,
Mm-hmm.
and he should be furnished with the means to make his life successful and rich.
Mm. Beautifully put. Beautifully put. Thank you both gentlemen for today. It's been a very good forum, and I think we've explored this looking at natural law in from a new and a fresh point of view. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, cheers.